Okay, thank you. So first of all, good morning Queensland, good morning Brisbane. So today I can report that we have 2 cases of COVID, but we are absolutely fine with them because they were in quarantine and the 2 people are in hospital. They were on board a ship, and Dr Young will explain a little bit more about that. That means we have 6 active cases. Our total number of cases is 1,160, and included in that number is a historical case, which has happened ages ago but has been added to the total, which means we've also had over 5,200 tests in the last 24 hours. Today we're very pleased to be here at Hurston. I think it was about 2 years ago we were turning the sod here on the STARS, which is the Surgical Treatment and Rehabilitation Service. It's due to open next year. I'm getting a sneak peek today with the Deputy Premier, the Minister for Education and the Chief Health Officer. And what this means is it means more beds and more surgeries. That's exactly what we want for Queenslanders and Queensland families. And there will be 5 operating theatres and another 2 operating theatres by June. So this is wonderful news. This is a fantastic precinct, and I'm very pleased that the government has been able to ensure that this happens, and we want to see those more surgeries happen and those extra beds, 182 beds, and it brings together surgery, rehabilitation and outpatient services, which is exactly what families need when we're looking after their health and we're keeping Queenslanders safe. Now, today, some more good news, and we have now put together a roadmap which takes us to the end of the year, and we're going to talk about easing some more restrictions. Now, the reason we can ease the restrictions is because Queenslanders have done a brilliant job. I want to thank all of the families out there, all of Queenslanders, for doing the right thing. Keep up the great work, but just remember too, if you're sick, stay at home and get tested. So what does that mean? So from 4 o'clock this afternoon, in some great news and in breaking news, you will be able to stand up inside and outside, whether it's a cafe, restaurant or a bar, and have a drink. Now, there's only one proviso. We want people to make sure that they are keeping up with their social distancing, but this is something that the communities have been saying to me. I've been travelling this week out at Moranbah, out up to Cairns as well, and I love to see people enjoying the lifestyle, and the only reason we can do this is because Queenslanders have done a great job, and I want to thank Dr Young, because Dr Young has provided us with that health advice which enables us to do that. Secondly, we've made it very clear that our borders have kept us safe. We are looking very closely at New South Wales, and if they do not have any community transmission for 28 days, we said very clearly that at the end of the month we review the plans, and that would mean there may be a possibility of opening up to New South Wales if there is no community transmission. But of course, their health experts are also concerned about some undetected community transmission at the moment. They're about to go into school holidays. So we will be watching that space very carefully, and Dr Young will be watching that space very carefully. In some other good news too, so stage 5 from 1 a.m. on the 1st of November would also mean that gatherings of up to 40 people in homes and public spaces across Queensland, and up to 40 people would be able to dance at weddings. We're not going to choose those 40 people. The weddings themselves will have to choose those 40 people at any one time. And then of course we've got stage 6 from 1 a.m. on the 1st of December, gatherings of up to 50 people, and of course the increase of the number of attendees permitted outside with those COVID-safe events, and unlimited dancing at weddings with the COVID-safe plan. So these are the issues that people have been raising with us, and because of the great response that Queenslanders have had, we have been able to act on the health advice. And of course, it does depend too on making sure that we don't have any community transmission. If we do have some community transmission on the roadmap, it says there what would happen. Gatherings would be reduced in homes, there'd be increased testing, wearing of masks, and of course Dr Young would take those steps that are necessary in relation to places with a disability and hospitals where PPE would have to be worn. So I hope this gives Queenslanders confidence to get out there and enjoy their state. We've been able to do things more in Queensland because we have taken those proactive steps. We've kept Queenslanders safe, and that means now that Queenslanders can enjoy Queensland can enjoy Queensland even more. So I'll hand over to the Deputy Premier and then the Chief Health Officer.
Thanks so much, Premier. Well, we have three pieces of wonderful news today. Of course, the first is that we have just those two new cases. Both were maritime crew, one a man in his 20s, another a man in his 30s. And I think it underlines just how effective our industry COVID-safe plans have been. They've allowed us to continue with maritime freight, with road freight, while also keeping our community safe. They're now being treated at the PA hospital, and our contact tracers are working to identify whether there is anyone at risk of infection from those cases. It means we now have 6 active cases. We did 5,256 tests in the last testing period, which is fantastic. The second piece of good news is that from 4 p.m. today in Queensland will be happy hour. We'll be able to again stand at the bar and have a drink, again stand at a restaurant or a cafe and have a snack. I want to shout out to our hospo workers. They've done a really fantastic job, and this seated restriction has been one of the hardest for them to enforce. It's been really important though. It's enforced social distancing, but it has been hard on our hospitality workers, and this will make their job a lot easier and will also make going out a lot more fun. That is part of, this announcement is part of our brand new roadmap, taking us through stages 4, 5 and 6 as we continue to ease restrictions here in Queensland. This is only possible because we've been so successful at limiting transmission. It's only possible because we managed to get on top of those recent clusters here in the Brisbane and Ipswich metropolitan areas. It's designed to give Queenslanders and businesses some certainty about where we're heading, a sense of exactly where we are heading with restrictions. Of course, things might change, but these roadmaps have been very effective and very welcome in the past. And we've always said that our health response is the foundation of our economic response. It is the first and necessary step of getting our economy open, getting businesses open again, and getting people back to work, which is, of course, our focus. Today, we've reached practical completion on STARS. So welcome to Queensland's newest public hospital building. This was a $340 million investment, delivering an additional 182 beds to what is already recognised worldwide as one of the world's biggest and best hospital campuses. We will add 7 theatres all up, 3 new endoscopy suites, 2 new CT scanners, 2 new X-rays and an MRI machine, allowing us to do literally thousands more procedures here at the RBWH within Metro North. Once the fit-out is complete, we'll begin doing those surgeries in February 2021. They'll be all up, and once we've fully ramped up, about 900 new frontline staff here delivering those surgeries. It is fantastic. It is just fantastic. As you can see, cutting-edge, world-class new health facility. It's one that we wouldn't have if this government were not elected in 2015. Campbell Newman and Deb Frecklington were planning to sell this precinct for a private hospital and for a residential apartment development. We were elected, we stopped that sale, and we've been able to deliver this fantastic new public hospital facility as well as a range of other developments that will now progressively open on this site. It underlines how governments matter. It underlines how who you elect matters. If Campbell Newman had been re-elected in 2015, we would not be standing here in this new public hospital building. And if Deb Frecklington were to be elected Premier, we would not see new public hospital facilities like this. We would see cuts to public hospital services, cuts to nurses, just like we did the last time the LNP were elected.
So we had 2 new cases overnight in Queensland. Both of them were crew that were due to go onto a vessel off the coast of Brisbane, from Port of Brisbane. And as part of the protocol, they went from the airport when they arrived into Queensland into hotel quarantine, were tested in hotel quarantine while they were waiting to go and join their vessel. Those tests came back positive late yesterday, so immediately we organised. Instead, they did go out to the vessel, but we've organised them to then be transferred to the PA hospital where they currently are. We're just working through whether they've had contact with anyone else. Their protocols are very rigid and they were followed, so we think the risk is very low, but of course we're working that through. So there were 2 different vessels that had crew changeovers from that flight that came into Brisbane. So we're just holding both those vessels at the moment while we work out whether there's anything further that needs to be done and working out whether there's any other people who've potentially been infected. That's all being worked through with MSQ, of course. They've arranged all of this as per the protocols that we have in place. So the risk there to the general community of Queensland is minimal, but of course we're just confirming all of that. We did have one other historical case, that's someone who acquired the infection many, many months ago and was picked up on serology, so that's been added into our numbers, but of course it happened many months ago, so it's not a concern now. We've had no other cases linked to that Brisbane Youth Detention Centre cluster or the Academy cluster, so that all looks like that's been settled, which is very good. But we do need to continue to be cautious, as people have been, because we are going to get these sorts of cases, although they're being managed very well and as per protocols. We can't stop the virus totally from entering Queensland. We know that, so that's why it's so important that if anyone has any symptoms, no matter how unlikely you think it might be COVID, it could be. So please just come forward and get tested, as all of those people did yesterday. It's really good to see the large numbers of Queenslanders who come forward each day and get tested, just to be certain. Our turnaround time is quite reasonable. It's well within 24 hours, so it means that you just need to isolate till you get that result, and that's very, very important as we go forward. So because of all of the testing that Queenslanders have been doing, showing that we don't have community transmission in Queensland, and because we've got all those systems in place, we can remove quite a number of those restrictions, which is really good. The last cluster that we ended up with, those 55 cases in total, shows that we can keep Queensland going forward and being managed without having to close it down. So you would all have seen that overseas, unfortunately, as they're going into winter, they're seeing more and more cases, so they're having to close their communities and put all those restrictions back in place. That doesn't need to happen in Queensland. If people keep on coming forward and get tested, and if people keep on managing that social distancing as much as they can, we can keep things moving forward here in Queensland. So that's what's happened here. People can now stand when they go out and about, still within that 1 per 4 square metres indoors, unless you're in a very small venue, but 1 per 2 square metres outdoors. But you can stand, and that's important as we go to Christmas, because we know people like having parties and nibbles and those sorts of things, so people can get together. That's really important as we move forward. Plus, we've already seen the increased numbers who can come together. And we're going to trial dancing and see how that goes at weddings. We're capping it at 40, just to see how that works. But it can be any 40. So we just want a maximum of 40 people out on the dance floor at any point in time and see how that works, so that we can look at whether there's other places we could start looking at dancing again. So all of these things are signs that we've got this virus under control in Queensland. We've still got to do certain things, very, very, very important things, but we can, if we continue to do those things, we can continue to loosen those restrictions.
You understand for drink or meal at outdoors?
No, indoors, outdoors, anywhere. Anywhere that's got a COVID safe plan. So you can do what you like, of course, in your own home, and you can now do that with 40 people, so that's your own home. But if you're out and about in a commercial type venue that has got a COVID safe plan or a checklist, yes, you can stand to eat or drink.
Why were these two crew members allowed to go to the ship if they tested positive?
That's the protocol that we need to keep freight going, so that they need to be separate from the general community. So when they arrive into the airport, they immediately need to go into hotel quarantine or to their ship. So if there's delay between when their ship arrives into port, so they can't go immediately from the airport to the ship, they go into a hotel. And then part of the process is that they get tested when they're in the hotel.
So they were waiting for the ship?
They were waiting for the ship, yes.
On the individual who had the historic case
Yeah.
serology, can you just tell us where that person was located and how it came out that they had had the virus?
Oh, a lot of people are just going to see their GP and are interested because they've been overseas or they've been involved in a cluster or whatever the reason. They just want to know whether or not they've had COVID. So we're doing a lot of that. So we're not, the private sector in the main, the private pathology sector is doing it, and they're picking up these cases. So they get added to our total, but it happened many, many months ago, so it's not an issue.
Where are we at with the 28-day matrix for opening to New South Wales? How many days along are we?
So their last case was the 8th. Oh, now I'm getting caught up.
It's a community case or...
Yeah, so it's when they've had a case that they aren't able to immediately link to one of their known clusters. So it's unlinked cases.
And you don't know how many days along?
When nowhere near that 28 days, because they just had one fairly recently.
It's still October 22.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking us through the science of the transmission when it comes to dancing and why you picked that number of 40?
Right, the reason I've recommended 40 is because 40 people can gather in their own home, so it makes sense that 40 people can gather in a wedding closely. That's the reason.
And what is the, I suppose, the increased risk? Would you mind just talking through, like, is it the sweat? Is it, like, what is it?
It's just
People
that
have to socially distance.
it's just the closeness, because you're not going to, I mean, it would be nice if people wish to dance 1.5 metre apart, that's fine, but people aren't if we're genuine about it. So we're allowing 40 people in their own home to gather closely, so it just makes sense to allow them to do that on the dance floor at a wedding, because they're people they know. I mean, these are their friends, their family that they've invited. They're the people they have a lot of interaction with normally, so it makes sense that they can do that at a wedding.
You've probably been asked this in the last few days. Is there any chance in the world that we could open New South Wales before November?
Oh, there's always chances, but at this point in time, the process is that we look at all of the information, and one factor is whether they've had any unlinked community transmission for 28 days, but there are a lot of other factors we look at. We look at what sewage testing they've been doing. We look at what testing of their community, how many people. We look at the restrictions they've got in place. So there's a whole range of things that we look at, and we look at them all at the end of the month to make a decision.
November 1 seems to be the best hope, correct?
That's our usual protocol, yes, to look at it at the end of the month and then put it in place the first day of the month.
Back in July when the bars first reopened and people were allowed to sit it up, that rule was revoked because we were worried about people mixing too much. What's changed?
We don't have any community transmission. If you remember, that's when we started having those 3 young women who went down to Melbourne and came back, and I was very worried about the risks then. And we had a lot of infectious days in the community. We ended up having up to 130 infectious days in the community when we got to that peak. So it was a really big concern. I am genuinely amazed, although I shouldn't be because we've got such fantastic health staff out there, but I am amazed that we restricted that most recent cluster to 55. I genuinely did think it was going to be a lot worse than that.
If people are standing up in bars, why is it so bad if they just like...
I'm not sure what the definition of dancing is. I think if someone is standing up and wriggling their hips, that's fine, Lydia. It's about the close interaction. It's really about getting closely with someone, particularly when we think about some venues where there are a lot of people who don't know each other, they wouldn't normally interact with them. That's why we want to start this with weddings where people genuinely do know each other.
But the onus won't rest on, say, the venue to police the numbers of who's on the dance floor, or will it?
I'm sure that people will do that properly.
Sorry, one more put up here. I see the dance ban is going to be reviewed on December 1. Is there any chance we could see people being allowed to dance in bars and whatnot by Christmas time?
I don't know. Let's trial this first. Let's do one step at a time and see what the outcome of that is before we then move on.
But there's hope.
There's always hope. Liv.
One more for Dr. Young. I just note on here as well that Victoria's obviously still very much in the red here. What's your best guess or best estimate for when you might look at even talking about opening that border?
Well, it really depends how they go. They have a lot of very, very severe restrictions in place, so that's stopping that spread at the moment. So when they start removing those restrictions, that's when we'll get a really good feel about how much community transmission there is.
Would you look at something like what WA has implemented with allowing exemptions for Victorians to travel here with protocols around testing?
Yes, and quarantine. So we have that in place already in Queensland. We do allow Victorians to come into Queensland if there are certain conditions there, and they quarantine and get tested.
But not, for example, a Victorian wanting to come up to watch the grand final, I was of the understanding that just a private individual wanting to visit the state would not be allowed the option of quarantining.
Not at the moment, because we have so many people wanting to come from Victoria and we don't have the capacity to manage that.
So when would you look at easing restrictions around that, maybe with a system like what WA has?
When we've seen the outcomes when they remove their internal restrictions. So today in Victoria, you cannot travel out of Melbourne into the regions because they are trying to stop spread from Melbourne to regional Victoria. So why would we open and risk spread from Melbourne to Queensland? Internally, they're worried about it in Victoria.
Probably a couple of things.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And just going back to that last question too, the Western Australian exemptions are very narrow and they're just catching up with what the exemptions are across other states at the moment. Yep.
Caretaker mode on Monday or Tuesday.
Yes.
Virgin deal has not been signed. Will you have that signed, given the LNP said they won't direct that money towards the Virgin deal?
I'll have to check with the Treasurer where that is at, but let me make it very clear. We support the regional jobs that Virgin brings. And if you're talking about growing the Queensland economy and backing the regions, we need Virgin. And part of that a deal is about having the headquarters remain here in Queensland.
But you'll need that signed this weekend, correct?
I'll double check with the Treasurer. But there's a lot at risk coming up to this election. So I hope people take the time to actually think about this. I'll have a lot more to say about it early next week. But this is going to be a very, very important election where every single vote will count.
And why was Adani given a indefinite deferral on their royalties?
This is nothing new. The government has been working on this. The Treasurer has signed off on that. And as we said, every cent needs to be paid back with interest. And it's no different to any other major resource project in Queensland. I don't have that information. The Treasurer has that.
Is that good enough, Premier, to just say to Queenslanders, trust us, it's a good deal, but you don't need to know the details?
It's done with every single other mining company.
This is only the second royalties deferral, though, so this is a new...
Yeah, but that's an option for mining companies. And, this is all about jobs at the end of the day. But you'll have to ask the Treasurer the exact specifics.
Is what Mick Green did a fraud?
Well, the Auditor General didn't say that.
But do you think it is?
Well, where did the Auditor General say that, Dominique?
But when you go...
No, you've got the document. Where did it say that?
If you look at how many of those...
It was about 50-50. It was about 50-50.
At the Labor electorates, though, he intervened in quite a few.
It's about 50-50.
Okay. And did you know before announcing the lockdown to mine on Tuesday that it was still before the courts?
now let me make it very clear that we have ticked off on the approval processes for that mine to commence construction. There is, I think from memory, 1 or 2 further leases, which is about expansion in 9 years' time. So it's ready to go. I find it unbelievable that people are criticising a project that is going to bring 1,000 jobs for regional Queensland.
But do you know it was still before the courts?
Not all of it is. That's not correct.
It is though.
No, it's not.
Parts of it are, and when you look at
Yeah, parts, the expansion. No, and New Auckland, the court decision's coming down next week. You don't have long. You don't. Can you please just be polite, please? That is coming down next week, and everyone will know the answer.
Just on the opposition's plan to four-lane the Bruce Highway, the opposition is adamant that they've, essentially had phone calls that say they're going to get this 80% if they win government, and they'll be able to four-lane the highway from Gympie to Cairns.
Look, we would welcome, let me say, we have put in place a 10-year plan for the Bruce Highway. Mark Bailey yesterday, the Minister for Main Roads, released information about how we continuously write to the federal government asking for more money. They've said that we've had enough. So, if there's going to be more money for infrastructure, I'll be the first person to welcome more money for infrastructure from the federal government. I have been calling for more money for federal infrastructure in Queensland for the last 5.5 years. I've said numerous times in the state parliament how Victoria and New South Wales gets more money for infrastructure than Queensland does.
So if you win the election, would you be making a phone call to sort of follow up on whether you'd be able to secure that deal as well?
Well, we're looking forward to seeing the federal budget. I'm not privy to that at the moment. It's coming down on Tuesday. We look forward to seeing Queensland's fair share in the federal budget.
What do you see as being the most important seat for Labor to win?
Sorry?
Which seat do you
Every
see?
seat. Every seat. Every single seat.
How are we looking, sorry, just quickly,
Yeah.
how are we looking for crowd numbers for the AFL? Have you had an update?
Well, my understanding is that it's sold out tonight, so that's going to be a great match between the Lions and Richmond. Go the Lions.
Sorry, I meant the grand final.
Oh, the grand final. I might get, the Deputy Premier might be across that, or we can get information.
About 30,000.
Yeah.
Would you mind saying that?
Sure.
Yeah. You want to say that?
Sure. After the successful trial of 75% density in our stadiums, the AFL Grand Final is good to go at the Gabba. 75%, 30,000 people will have a great time that day.